My name's Delaney Ward, and when I turned 13, my family gave me the kind of birthday I'd never forget because they made damn sure of it. We lived just outside Lancaster, Ohio. Small house, one floor, no privacy. My dad, Russell Ward, used to be a cop, the kind who always had something to prove and nobody to prove it to except his kids. My mom, Sharon, mostly stayed quiet unless she was defending him. And then there was Bridget, my little sister, 3 years younger, queen of everything. If she sneezed, someone clapped. I'd spent weeks trying not to get my hopes up. Every birthday before that had either been ignored or turned into some weird life lessons about humility, but this time something felt different. My dad looked me in the eye that week. My mom bought me a dress, blue with tiny white flowers, and said it was just in case. Bridget wasn't calling me names for once. It was weird, suspiciously nice. On the morning of my birthday, my dad told me to be ready by 3 p.m. and said we were doing something special. I should have known better, but I was 13. I wanted to believe. I put on the blue dress. I even curled my hair with a straightener that barely worked. I thought maybe we were going somewhere, like going somewhere Applebee's or something stupid like that. Bridget was in the front seat when the truck pulled up, grinning like she knew a joke I didn't. My mom opened the back door and held out a red satin blindfold. "It's a surprise," she said. "Just trust us for once." So, yeah, like an idiot, I got in. Let them tie it over my eyes. Let them buckle me in. For the first 10 minutes or so, it was okay. My dad kept saying, "You'll never forget this day." Bridget kept giggling. My mom said I looked beautiful. I was smiling so hard it hurt. But then the ride got longer and quieter, like too quiet. We hit gravel, then dirt, then something bumpier. Finally, the truck stopped. My dad's voice was flat. "All right, out. Hands." Still blindfolded, I stepped out. My heel sheepishly sank into something soft. Grass, mud. No one took my hand. I just stood there waiting. Then I heard the doors shut. The engine started. Laughter. The tire spun in the dirt. I ripped off the blindfold. There was nothing. Just me and a rotting barn standing crooked in the middle of overgrown weeds. One side was collapsing. The door was open just enough to show dust, cobwebs, and what looked like the corpse of a wheelbarrow. I turned around and saw the truck already making a U-turn. Windows down. My mom shouted, "Surprise!" Bridget yelled, "Happy barn day, loser." My dad honked twice like that was the punchline. Then they drove off. No cake, no party, no people, just a barn, a blue dress, and the sound of them laughing like they just pulled off the joke of the century. It took me a few minutes to move. I stood there thinking maybe this was still part of it. Maybe they'd reevaluate. Maybe someone was hiding inside the barn. Nope. No one came. No one cared. That's when I realized this wasn't a joke. This wasn't a lesson. This was precisely what it looked like. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even walk into the barn. I stood still for a while, then turned and walked in the opposite direction down a dirt road I didn't know the name of. Heels off, feet in the gravel. Sunday burning the back of my neck. No phone, no purse. They'd said they'd hold it so you don't drop it. Every step felt heavier. Every 5 minutes, I looked over my shoulder like I believed they'd change their mind. They didn't. The gravel tore up the bottoms of my feet, but I kept walking like stopping would make me theirs again. I didn't know where I was going. No houses were in sight, just open fields and fences held together with rust and splinters. I walked past a dead raccoon, a shredded tire, and a mailbox that had been shot clean. I didn't cry. Crying felt too close to begging, and I had already begged by showing up dressed nicely. After what felt like forever, I saw a mailbox that wasn't tilted. Behind it, a dirt driveway led to a small ranch house with a sagging porch and a pickup out front. The truck was old but clean. There were boots by the door. One knocked over. I hesitated. For a second, I wondered if I looked too crazy to knock. Then the door creaked open and an older man stepped out. White beard, denim over denim, and a ball cap that said Cray Farms. He looked at me for half a second and said, "You lost or running?" I said, "Bit of both." He didn't ask any more questions, just pointed to a metal chair near the porch and said, "Sit before you fall." I sat. He returned with a plastic bottle of water and a flip phone that looked like it had survived a war. I called 911 and told them I needed a ride home. When the dispatcher asked where home was, I paused. Not because I didn't know the address, but because I didn't want to go there. Still, I gave it. The older man, Wendell Cray, stayed with me until the sheriff's cruiser pulled into the drive. When the deputy asked Wendell what happened, he said, "Kids had enough." That was it. And it was more kindness than I'd gotten in 13 years. The deputy drove me home without saying much. He dropped me off at the corner. I walked up the driveway barefoot, holding the water bottle like it might still protect me. The house was quiet. I opened the front door. My dad was watching a rerun of some 90s cop show. My mom was in the kitchen pouring wine like it was a Tuesday. No one looked surprised. I stood there waiting for someone to speak. My mom finally said, "Well, you're back." That's something. My dad didn't even look at me. "It was a joke," he said flatly. "You overreacted." I said nothing. Bridget walked in with her phone in her hand, thumbs flying. She smirked. "Guess who's famous now?" She held up the screen. It was a picture of a Hallaton birthday cake with pink letters that said, "Happy Freedom Day, Barn Girl." The caption, "Best prank ever." There were likes, comments, emojis, people laughing. I walked upstairs and shut my door. Later that night, I heard them arguing about what I wasn't sure. My name came up. My mom said I was too sensitive. My dad said I always wanted to be the victim. Bridget laughed and said I should be glad people noticed me for once. The next morning, I woke up and checked my school email on the shared computer in the hallway. Someone had forwarded the post to a bunch of kids in my grade. The subject line was "Barn Baby for Life." That was the first time I ever considered changing my name. Not because I was ashamed, but they'd never find me again because I wanted to disappear so well. I started skipping dinner to avoid hearing my name come up like a punchline. By then, I'd realized that silence was my house's only safe language. If I said nothing, they'd lose interest. So, I said nothing. I came home, went straight to my room, did my homework, stared at the ceiling, and read anything that made me feel like life didn't have to be this stupid forever. The school library became my hiding spot. I started pulling random books off shelves, especially ones with titles that had words like resilience, strategy, or survival. One of them had a chapter on U.S. Army field training. I read it 3 times. I didn't want to be a soldier. Not really. I just wanted the version of myself I saw on those pages to be untouchable. Someone who could walk into the fire and not blink. I copied down quotes like they were spells. One of them said, "You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training." That stuck with me. At school, things weren't much better. The barn baby joke had legs. Someone mooed at me in the hallway. Someone else taped a picture of a cow to my locker. One kid made a video edit of me standing in front of a barn door crying with sad violin music in the background. It went semi-viral for about a week, which in middle school is a lifetime. Teachers did nothing. One told me I needed to learn to laugh at myself. Another said, well, at least they're not hitting you. I stopped raising my hand in class. I stopped wearing anything with color. I figured the less I gave them to work with, the less they'd get. Back home, my mom was deep into her wine and denial routine. My dad mostly ignored me unless he needed someone to clean something or fetch his keys. One night, I overheard him talking to someone from his old precinct. I guess they were catching up. The guy asked about us, the kids. My dad said, "Delaney's still quiet." That's good. The less she talks, the better. He laughed. The other guy laughed, too. That one hit me in a way the barn never did. The barn was a moment. That sentence was a summary. That was what he wanted. Not a daughter, just silence in a blue dress. After that, I stopped talking to them altogether. No good morning, no what's for dinner, nothing. I even practiced saying my name flatly, like I wasn't attached to it. I started looking up articles on how to join the military, not the romantic stuff, the real stuff, requirements, training, what they paid, where you could go, what would happen if you had no family. No one told me anything at home, but the internet did. I kept a notebook under my bed. It had pages labeled exit plans, skills to learn, and things to pack. I was 14, but I felt 40. One night, Bridget barged into my room without knocking. She saw the notebook and grabbed it before I could stop her. She read one page and rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic," she said, tossing it back like it was nothing. "You act like anyone even cares what you do." She left the door open behind her. That night, I folded my notebook into my backpack, zipped it shut, and promised myself 2 things. 1, I would leave the second I legally could. 2, I would never give them the satisfaction of watching me break. I started running before school just to feel like I was getting somewhere. It wasn't about fitness. It was about motion, about having something I could control. My alarm went off at 4:45. I'd put on the same busted sneakers, slip out the back door, and run until the sun made the street look less dangerous. When I turned 17, I met with a recruiter named Gunnery Sergeant Daniels. He was all buzzcut and no nonsense. The first time I told him I wanted to join SCOP's psychological operation, he raised an eyebrow and said, "You got a strong stomach?" I nodded. He said, "Good. You'll need it." I wasn't interested in frontline gunfire. I was interested in how people thought, broke, and believed lies when the lies felt better than the truth. I knew a little about that already. Senior year was a blur. I didn't go to prom. I didn't walk at graduation. I signed my papers when I turned 18 and shipped out 2 weeks later. No party, no tears, and no one at the bus stop. My mom texted, "Good luck." My dad didn't say anything. Bridget posted an old picture of us on her story with the caption, "Well, that happened." I didn't respond. Basic training stripped everything down. No one cared who you were before, just whether you could finish what you started. I liked that. For the first time, my silence wasn't a weakness. It was strategy. I followed orders. I kept my bunk tight. I didn't speak unless I had something worth saying. People noticed, but not in a bad way. One guy called me ghost quiet. Another said I had quiet killer energy. I took it as a compliment. At Fort Liberty, I got assigned to a small SCOPS team under Staff Sergeant Reese Molina. She was sharp, direct, and a leader who never raised her voice unless she wanted the whole sky to listen. The first day she saw me, she said, "Ward, you think before you talk." Good. Let's keep it that way. She taught me how to read people, listen between the lines, find the weak spot in someone's thinking, and nudge it just enough to make them fold. I learned how propaganda worked and how misinformation spread faster when it wrapped itself in emotion. She said, "People don't believe facts. They believe what makes them feel less afraid." That hit harder than I expected. She wasn't soft, but she saw things. One night after training, she asked, "What are you really here for, Ward?" I told her I wanted to disappear. She said, "Then you better learn how to blend, not vanish." Vanishing is just another way of letting them win. We made simulation drills, deception campaigns, hostage negotiations, and psychological pressure points. I wasn't the best at hand-to-hand, but I could quickly pick apart an enemy's weakness. When it came to analysis, I had them beat. I remember one exercise, a mock interrogation, where I had to convince a captured enemy to give up intel. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I asked him one question: "Who do you think they'll blame when this goes wrong?" He cracked in less than 10 minutes. Reese pulled me aside and said, "You ever turn that on the people who raised you?" I said, "Not yet." She smiled and said, "When you do, make it count." I stopped dreaming about home and started dreaming about exits, exits from buildings, exits from conversations, exits from anything that felt like a trap. I even memorized where every emergency door was on every base I served. Not out of paranoia, out of habit. Knowing how to leave made me feel like I had power. I was 23 when they shipped me to Afghanistan. SCOPS didn't mean I kicked down doors. It meant I got inside heads. We met with local leaders, analyzed propaganda flow, intercepted radio calls, and designed fake broadcasts. We weren't just fighting gunfire. We were fighting narratives. What people believed, what they feared, what made them follow orders that got them killed. Most of the time it felt like paperwork with an edge. But sometimes it got personal. My team wasn't big. 6 people, tight rotation. One of them, Lyle Booker, was from Montana. Grew up around cattle. He made barn jokes once early on, not knowing. I didn't say anything, but he noticed how my face shifted. He never brought it up again. Instead, he started saving the last protein bar and sitting beside me on transport. Nothing romantic, just quiet respect. Then came Operation Northridge. Intel said a local village was being used to funnel weapons. Our job was to contact the elders and shake loose what was real from what was staged. It was supposed to be low engagement, not even hostile territory. We arrived at dawn. Something felt off. Kids weren't playing. The doors were shut. No animals. That's when it hit me. It was too quiet, like someone had pressed mute on the whole place. We split into pairs to sweep. I went with Booker. We moved through the alleyways, eyes sharp. Booker stopped before a mud wall house and said, "I hear movement inside." He motioned me to cover. Then he stepped in. A second later, I heard the crack of a shot. Just one. I rushed in. Booker was on the floor. Throat hit. Blood fast. His mouth moved, but no sound came. I held pressure. I told him not to be dramatic. I lied to both of us. He died in my lap before the medevac even launched. The shooter, a boy, maybe 14, scared, shaking. We found him hiding behind a curtain. He had no training, just a rifle too big for his arms and orders from someone who told him Americans were monsters. He didn't even know what he'd done. Command took the kid. I don't know what happened to him. I didn't ask. That night, I sat alone behind our outpost. I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I just sat with my boots in the dirt and my back against the wall, the same way I used to sit on the back porch at home when no one remembered to feed me. Reese found me. She didn't speak for a while. Just lit a cigarette and watched the horizon. Eventually, she said, "People always think the war is outside, but it's not. It's what you carry home." I didn't answer, but she was right. Weeks later, on a recon patrol, we passed through another village. A girl ran out from a doorway chasing a goat, tripped, and fell face first into the dirt. Everyone laughed. She looked up embarrassed until I helped and brushed her off. She couldn't have been more than 8. Then I noticed the bruises on her arm. Old ones. The way she flinched when someone raised their voice. I knew that look. I slipped her a protein bar when no one was watching. She looked at me like I'd handed her gold. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. I felt like I had a shape again, something solid, something that could still reach out. I mailed Booker's dog tags to his sister with a note that took me 3 hours to write and 10 seconds to regret. She sent back a thank you card I never opened. I didn't need to. Grief isn't a two-way street, and I wasn't looking to make it a conversation. A month later, during a night training op, I twisted my knee bad enough to hear a pop. The base doc called it a clean tear and said, "Congratulations. You're about to get more familiar with ice packs and boredom than you ever wanted." I finished my tour limping and pissed off. No more field work. No more illusions of invincibility. PT kept me occupied, but the injury didn't heal right. By the end of the year, the paperwork came through. Honorable discharge due to medical non-deployability, which is military speak for thank you, goodbye. No ceremony, no crowd. I flew home commercial, sitting between a screaming toddler and a guy who coughed the whole flight. When I landed, no one was waiting. I picked up my single-checked bag and limped to the curb. The first night back in the States, I slept on the floor of a motel in Waco because the bed looked too clean and fake. I stared at the ceiling for hours. It reminded me of the cracked paint above my childhood bed. Funny how that's the detail my brain decided to save. I rented a room in someone's detached garage apartment in Austin. It smelled like cat pee and old paint. I didn't mind. I didn't need perfect. I just needed somewhere no one asked questions. I started working night shifts at a 24-hour coffee shop. Quiet, repetitive, easy to disappear in. During the day, I applied for disability paperwork and checked Craigslist for odd jobs. I didn't call my family. They didn't call me. The silence was mutual and blessed. I'd sit behind the register when the shop was dead and write some nights. At first, it was just brain dump stuff, lists, stray thoughts, and lines that sounded like they came from someone smarter. But over time, it turned into essays about silence, about surviving childhood in plain sight, about what it feels like never to hear your name said kindly. I didn't use my real name. I created a blog called Dead Signal and posted it anonymously. I figured maybe 5 people would read it. Turned out it was more like 50,000 within a few weeks. Apparently, many of us were out there, people raised in houses that looked fine from the outside but felt like slow-motion demolition inside. People who learned early that crying got you laughed at and talking got you punished. One of the posts titled "The Birthday Joke That Never Ended" started getting shared around military forums, trauma support groups, and even Reddit. I wrote it on a whim, half daring myself to say the words out loud. The post ended with, "He left me in a barn. He thought I'd stay there." A few days later, I got an email from a women's veterans collective out of Oregon. They said, "Your voice is raw and sharp. We'd like you to come speak at our next trauma recovery event." I read the message 5 times before closing my laptop. Then I opened it again and replied, "Sure, why not?" Huh. I bought a second-hand blazer for $12 and hoped it looked like I knew what I was doing. The event was in Portland, inside a yoga studio turned community center with folding chairs, coffee, and paper cups. I was scheduled after a woman who spoke about losing her military benefits after coming out. A hard act to follow. When they called my pseudonym DCRS, I stood up. No one clapped. No one booed. Perfect. I walked to the mic, cleared my throat, and read the piece I'd memorized the night before. I skipped the jokes. They weren't ready for jokes. I went with the truth, cold, plain, sharp-edged. By the time I hit the line about the barn, 3 women were crying, not sobbing, just tears they weren't trying to hide. One woman nodded so hard I thought her neck would snap. Another mouthed the word yes like it hurt. Afterwards, people lined up, not for selfies, for solidarity. They shared pieces of their garbage childhoods, bad birthdays, and fathers who weaponized silence. One woman hugged me and whispered, "You made me feel less crazy." That stuck. Flying back to Austin, I stared out the plane window and thought, what if I stopped hiding? I opened my laptop during the flight and Googled, how to change your name legally in Texas. 3 weeks later, I entered the Travis County Courthouse and filed to become Delaney Cross. It wasn't fancy, just necessary. I didn't want to carry Ward anymore. That name felt like drywall dust and broken rules. When the paperwork came through, I bought myself a cupcake, chocolate, no candles. That same week, I saw a listing for a foreclosed property in Marlin, about 2 hours outside Austin. It was an old farmhouse with bad plumbing, overgrown grass, and a faded porch swing that looked like it hadn't moved in a decade. The address punched me in the gut. It was my grandmother's house, the one I'd only been to twice before my mom's side of the family vanished behind divorce papers and resentment. I remembered the porch smelled like cedar and her hands were always warm. According to the deed, my grandmother had willed it to me before she died. My mother had tried to contest it years ago but failed. The property was still sitting there, empty, abandoned, tax delinquent, waiting. I called a locksmith. I called a contractor. I used the last of my discharge payout and a chunk of savings from my blog donations to take it off the market before anyone else could grab it. The first time I stepped inside, the floor creaked like a warning. Dust floated in sunbeams through cracked windows. Dead bugs lined the window sills. In the back room, I found an old arm wire. Inside it, folded in a plastic bag, was a letter addressed to my mother. The handwriting was shaky. I unfolded it carefully. It was a suicide note. My grandmother had written it years before she passed. Maybe the first time she tried. Maybe just the time she meant it. The letter said she couldn't stand watching her daughter let a man ruin her kids. It said she tried to speak up once and was told to mind her business. It said, "If you don't protect Delaney, no one will." I read that line twice. Then I sat on the dusty floor and leaned back against the wall like the air had been knocked out. Later that night, I put the letter in a fireproof box and taped a sticky note to the lid, "Legacy starts here." I tore up the overgrown grass with my bare hands until my palms blistered and the yard looked like someone gave a damn. The house didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to feel like it belonged to someone who saw it. I patched the walls. I scraped paint. I pulled moldy curtains off rusted rods and opened every window like I was daring the place to breathe again. I didn't hire a crew. I hired 3 women from the Veterans Center, mothers, mechanics, and ex-NCOS who knew how to work without asking dumb questions. We gutted the back room and turned it into a group space with mismatched chairs and a circle rug. We knocked down a half wall to open the kitchen. I painted one room yellow because someone once told me yellow makes people feel safer. I didn't know if it was true, but I wanted to believe it. I named the project Crosslight, a combination of the new name I chose and the thing I was finally doing, shining a down light through what they tried to bury. It wasn't a business. It wasn't a nonprofit yet. It was an idea with walls, plumbing, and women who showed up anyway. The first weekend, 12 women came. All were invited quietly through blogs, forums, and side channels. No marketing, just word of mouth to hurt ear. They came with duffel bags, not suitcases. Most of them didn't talk much that first day. We had a pot of chili on the stove and a sign taped to the fridge saying, "Nothing in this house is off limits except cruelty." The first night, we sat in the living room on thrift store cushions. No one forced introductions, no icebreakers, just the quiet understanding that we were there because someone, somewhere, once told us we didn't matter, and we were starting to question that. I told them I wasn't a therapist. I told them I wasn't healed. I just knew what it felt like to walk away and not know where away even was. And that maybe having a place where people didn't flinch when you said your father's name made a difference. There was a woman named Tasha who'd lost custody of her son after her ex framed her as unstable. There was Marble, an ex-army mechanic who hadn't spoken to her siblings in 9 years. A woman named June wore long sleeves even when it was hot and sat with her back to the wall. No one asked for backstories. People offered what they could when they could. We cooked together. We planted flowers. We hung blackout curtains in the bedroom so people could sleep through flashbacks. We put notes in the bathroom mirror like, "You are not too much. You are just finally seen." On the third night, we did an open mic, not for performance, just for whatever wanted to come out. Tasha read a poem that didn't rhyme but landed like a brick. Marble sang something in Spanish that none of us understood, but we all felt anyway. I didn't plan on speaking. But I stood up, cleared my throat, and said something I didn't write down. I said, "You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that makes them more comfortable, least of all the people who broke you." A few women nodded. One clapped softly. Then I heard someone whisper, "She just said what I've been trying to say for 10 years. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like exhaling. Maybe the barn didn't get the last word after all. I stopped checking the front gate for threats and started checking it for mail. Most of it was boring flyers, bills, the occasional catalog from the home goods store I never signed up for. Then one afternoon, wedged between an electricity notice and a coupon for dog food I didn't need, there was a white envelope with my old last name spelled out in sharp handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade, Bridget Ward. No return address, no stamp, hand-delivered. Inside was a letter, 2 pages folded neat like it came from someone who still ironed pillowcases. The opening line, "Hey, Delaney, I'm not sure you'll read this, but I had to try." She went on about, Dad said he'd collapsed in the backyard. Stroke. Half his face didn't work anymore. Hospital bills were piling up. The VA was slow. The insurance paperwork listed me as the only person authorized to make medical decisions. Someone never updated their next of kin forms. She ended it with, "I know we were awful. I know we laughed. I don't even remember why anymore. Please just help him. Please." I didn't answer. 2 days later, I got an email. Same name, different tone. Delaney. If he doesn't get moved to a better facility, he'll die there. I can't cover it. I'm barely hanging on myself. I know you probably hate me, but I'm asking you as your sister. Don't let him be like this. There was a photo attached. He is in a hospital bed. Pale tubes in his nose. That same jawline I used to have. That same smug mouth is only now lopsided and slack. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to feel, but because I knew exactly what I felt and didn't like how much sense it made. I printed the email, folded it, and stuffed it in the same fireproof box as my grandmother's letter. Then I left the house and went into town for groceries I didn't need. The next morning, one of the Crosslight women knocked on my office door. It was Marble. She said, "Someone's crying in the kitchen." I nodded and got up. We didn't run a clinic. We weren't licensed for anything but compassion, but people came here to fall apart in peace. And part of peace was knowing someone would mop the floor when you were done. I made tea. I cleaned counters. I checked our upcoming retreat roster and added 3 more names to the wait list. That afternoon, while sorting mail, I found a manila envelope with official-looking documents from the state, legal paperwork confirming I was in fact the primary medical agent for Russell Ward. No one had changed it. No one thought to. There was a checkbox at the bottom. Do you accept the designation and responsibility for continued care? I stared at it, pen in hand, the weight of an entire house behind me and 15 years of silence in my chest. I didn't check yes. I didn't check no. I put the envelope on the bottom shelf of my desk and went outside to water the front plants. The sun was low. The gravel path looked clean. A woman on the porch was sketching in a notebook. Someone else was folding towels. No one knew that my father might die if I did nothing. No one asked. No one needed to. I drove past the barn without planning to, then circled back like my hands didn't get the memo. It looked smaller than I remembered, leaning a little more to one side like time had finally shoved it in the ribs. The roof was half caved in. The weeds were up to my knees, but the bones were the Samuran wood, rusted hinges, and that sagging door with the split down the middle like a mouth about to say something awful. I parked on the gravel shoulder and left the engine running just in case, not because I was scared, but because part of me still wanted a way out. The smell hit first, damp, stale, like rainwater trapped in a closed throat. I stepped over the fallen gate and walked up to the barn door, the same one I'd stood in front of at 13, blindfolded, heels sinking into the dirt while my family peeled away in a cloud of laughter. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a mason jar. Inside, a candle, a lighter, and a folded scrap of blue fabric, the hem of the dress I wore that day, the one I'd cut up years ago but never thrown out. I cleared a patch of weeds near the base of the barn and set the jar down, lit the candle, watched the flame catch like it had something to prove. Then I sat, not dramatic, just grounded. I took out a notebook, the one I carried during deployments, pages stiff with dust and old sweat. I opened a blank sheet and wrote a letter I had no plan to send. It started, "You thought I'd forget." I kept writing, line after line. Not for him. Not even for me. I just want to empty the part of my head that still played reruns of that afternoon like it was some sick sitcom. I wrote until the ink bled through the page. Then I folded the paper, placed it in the jar next to the fabric scrap, and blew out the candle. Smoke curled up, then vanished. I buried the jar where the gravel met the weeds. No marker, no ceremony, just a quiet place to store what didn't deserve to follow me home. As I stood up, my legs shook, not from weakness, but from finally letting go of something I didn't realize I'd been holding tight for so long that it fused with my spine. I didn't cry right away. I walked back to the car, closed the door, and sat behind the wheel, staring at the dashboard like it owed me something. Then it hit out of nowhere like being punched from inside. One sob, sharp and fast, then another. Then I was folded over the steering wheel, shaking like my ribs didn't know what to do without the weight they'd been carrying. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't cinematic. It was messy and ugly and real. I screamed once, not loud, just enough to clear space. Then I leaned back, wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweatshirt, and breathed like the air finally had enough room. A truck passed behind me. Didn't slow down. Didn't care. Perfect. I didn't look back at the barn. I didn't need to. That place got one version of me. It doesn't get this one. I washed my face in the gas station bathroom like I hadn't buried a version of myself behind a barn. The fluorescent light was brutal, and the paper towels were even worse. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought, you don't look different. You just weigh less. I drove home with the windows cracked and no music. Let the silence do its job for once. The next morning, I sent 2 emails. One was to Bridget. Subject line, he can come. That's it. No greeting, no signature. The message itself was just the time and address. I didn't say who I was. If she couldn't figure it out, that wasn't my problem. The other was to our on-site medical coordinator at CrossEye. I asked if we could host a guest with limited mobility, potential speech impairment, and a history of manipulating everyone around him. She said, we've got room, but we don't have patience. Your call. I made it. 3 days later, a transport van pulled up the gravel path. Russell Ward was in the back seat, slumped slightly to one side with a neck brace, a nasal tube, and a look that didn't know whether it should be ashamed or amused. Bridget helped him as if she were still pretending to be someone's favorite daughter. She looked around like the place might bite her. I stepped out onto the porch. He saw me and froze. Bridget's voice cracked. Delaney. I didn't answer. I just turned, opened the front door, and let them follow. Inside, the front hall was lined with photos from the last 6 retreats. Women smiling, planting things, painting, napping in hammocks. A quote was stenciled on the wall above the kitchen archway, "You are not hard to love. You were just taught wrong." Russell's eyes scanned the room like it was a courtroom. Bridget kept her purse clutched like someone might steal it. I didn't offer water. I didn't offer comfort. I let them sit in the lounge space near the big windows where the light hit full force around noon, making everything impossible to ignore. At exactly 11:45, I stepped onto the main rug, cleared my throat, and addressed the group, 15 women all seated in a loose circle. Russell in the corner and Bridget pretending not to squirm. I want to welcome our guest today, I said flatly. They've known me longer than anyone else here, but they never really knew me at all. One of the women, Tasha, nodded like she already knew where this was going. This project, I continued, was never about revenge. It was about recovery. But recovery starts when you stop pretending the people who hurt you didn't. No one clapped. No one cried. They just listened because that's what we do. I turned toward Russell, made direct eye contact, and said, "You don't have to apologize. I wouldn't believe you anyway, but you do need to know you're not in charge of the story anymore. His mouth twitched. Maybe it was the stroke. Maybe not. Bridget stood up, opened her mouth, and then sat back down. I looked around the room. Every face, every scar, every woman sitting taller now than when she arrived. We don't build from anger, I said. We build from truth, even if it burns. That was the speech. No fireworks, just air finally cleared of old smoke. Russell blinked like someone had dimmed the lights. But no one had touched the switch. He looked smaller than I remembered, not just in the wheelchair, but how his hands clutched the armrests like gravity had suddenly become personal. For a second, I wondered if he even understood where he was. Then he opened his mouth and proved I gave him too much credit. So, this is what you've been doing? He croaked half words, half air. Running some pity camp. No one flinched. Not even Bridget, though. Her mouth twitched like she wanted to slide under the couch. I didn't answer him. That was the part he never got. Silence didn't mean surrender. It meant I'd already measured the distance and decided he wasn't worth the reach. Bridget finally spoke. Delaney, this isn't what we came here for. We just wanted to talk. I turned toward her slowly. She wore that expensive leather crossbody bag she used to brag about online, even though her email said she couldn't afford his care. Her lip gloss was perfect. Her voice was not. He needs help, she said quieter now. The insurance won't cover the rehab center. You're the only name on the papers. I'm not trying to guilt you. You already did that, I cut in. She stopped talking. Russell tried again. Whatever you think happened back then? No, I said. You don't get to start sentences like that. Not here. He looked like he was going to argue. Then he didn't. I stepped forward, close enough that he could see I wasn't angry. I wasn't even cold. I was empty in a way that felt clean. You left me in a barn on my birthday, I said, calm as the clock ticks. You watched me cry through a windshield and thought it was funny. You filmed it. You posted it. You called it character building. He didn't deny it, which was almost funny. I turned to Bridget. You helped. You laughed. You let it live online for years. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I'm sorry, she whispered. I really am. I believed her. Not because she earned it, because I didn't need her to anymore. I stepped back and looked at both of them. This place, I said, motioning around the room, isn't about forgiveness. It's about freedom, and freedom means I don't owe you anything. Not money, not visits, not an ending. How is so? Bridget wiped her face with her wrist. I walked over and hugged her. Not because she deserved it, because I could. Then I handed her a manila envelope with the state seal and said, this is a denial of responsibility for medical transfer. I filed it. He's being referred to state care. You'll get a call in a week. They'll handle placement. Russell made a noise somewhere between a scoff and a grunt. I met his eyes one last time. You don't get to die in the home of the girl you left for dead. I nodded at the door. You're done here. The coordinator stepped in from the hallway, professional and polite. She wheeled him out without a word. Bridget followed behind, her head low, her heels clicking like punctuation marks no one needed. No one clapped. This wasn't a movie. Someone in the circle adjusted a blanket. Someone else refilled the tea. The space didn't celebrate. It just kept breathing. I trimmed the dead branches off the oak by the porch as it owed me something. The air smelled sharp, soil, sawdust, and early spring end. The cold that didn't bite reminded you where your skin ended. My arms ached. My fingers were numb through the gloves. It felt good. Honest work that didn't require a backstory. Inside, the kettle was on. The retreat group that week was already halfway through a journaling session. You could always tell when the energy in the room was shifting, quieter, steadier, like everyone was finally breathing at the same rhythm. Marble came out with a stack of clean towels and nodded toward the driveway. The truck from Austin's here. I washed my hands and met the delivery guy outside. He handed me a clipboard and pointed at the crates. They were plants, dozens of them. Lavender, marigold, milkweed, wild rose. All were ordered from a local nursery with a handwritten thank you note between the pots. I didn't remember sending in the order, but the handwriting was mine. It must have been one of those nights I planned without telling myself. We planted them that afternoon. 3 residents, Tasha and I, now lived on site as part-time coordinators. No music, just shovels, laughter, and dirt under our nails. The flower beds ran along the path leading to the back of the house, right up to where the old shed used to be. I tore the shed down myself 2 months earlier. Too many spiders, too much rot. I'd stared at the patch of dirt it left behind like it was a scar I couldn't decide what to do with. Now it was going to be a garden. We worked until sunset. Tasha painted a wooden sign with shaky letters that said, "Nothing buried here stays buried." Men, we nailed it to a post and stuck it in the middle of the garden. The local paper sent a photographer the following week, said they were doing a piece on grassroots recovery models and wanted to feature Crosslight. I let them in on one condition. No post photos, just people being people. The article dropped on a Tuesday. By Thursday, we had over 60 new inquiries. Women from across the state, some out of state, all saying versions of the same thing. I didn't know a place like this existed. I didn't know I was allowed to want something like this. One letter stood out. Handwritten, shaky, no return address. I saw you in the paper. I didn't recognize you at first. I hope you're doing better. I hope you're not angry forever. He doesn't have long. There was no name. I didn't need one. I folded the letter and burned it in a ceramic bowl on the porch while sipping cold coffee. It turned to ash like everything else that once tried to outlive its purpose. Later that week, we held a dedication ceremony. Nothing big, just some tea lights and mason jars and people standing barefoot in the grass. I said a few words. Nothing rehearsed. This place was built by people who were told they were too much, too loud, too angry, too sensitive. Turns out we were just early. Wall. Everyone laughed a little, then clapped. We unveiled a small wooden sign near the garden entrance. Burned into the grain was a single phrase. No one left alone again. Nobody cried. They touched it gently as if it meant more than they could say out loud. I opened my laptop to check retreat bookings and saw his name in the obituary column as if it was just another typo. Russell Ward, age 72, survived by 2 daughters. No services scheduled, no photo, no quote, just a black line on a digital page. Like a clerical update, not a death. I stared at the screen for a full minute. No breath, no reaction, just a strange stillness. Like my nervous system was waiting to be told what to feel. But nothing came. Not relief, not sadness, not closure, just space. I closed the laptop. There was no announcement, no candle, no moment of silence. He didn't earn one. I only took the folded paperwork, hospital denial, name removal, the letter Bridget never got a reply to, and shoved it into the fireplace. It burned fast, quiet. It wanted to disappear before anyone could repeat its name. A few days later, I sat at the same kitchen table where we held peer meetings and started writing. Not a blog post, not a speech, something longer, something messier, something that would take more than 800 words to say. I wrote about being 13 and blindfolded. I wrote about silence that sharpens into survival. I wrote about war, about coming home and finding the battle still in your bones. I wrote about shame so subtle it wears your name. I wrote about a barn and a garden and the women who helped me grow out of both. The piece was raw. I didn't edit for tone. I didn't soften any details to make it palatable. I didn't pretend to forgive just to sound evolved. At the very end, I typed a sentence I didn't expect until it came out of my hands. I'm not better than them. I'm just free. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I hit save. That became the closer for the book. I didn't plan on writing the book, but somehow I finished it in 6 months. It didn't hit bestseller lists. It didn't get a movie deal, but it got passed around in forums, folded into backpacks, and mailed between sisters who hadn't talked for years. That was more than enough. We planted new rows of lavender that spring. Bigger ones. We built a bench out of salvaged wood from the barn site. Someone nailed a plaque to the backrest without asking me. We don't go back to the people who buried us alive. We plant gardens over the place they left us for dead. No one took credit for the quote. They didn't have to. Crosslight expanded slowly, carefully. Not into some brand or national chain. Just enough to build a second house nearby, one with better accessibility. We called it the North Wing, even though it technically faced east. We thought that was funny. Sometimes I walk the gravel path before sunrise, tea in hand, barefoot. The cold feels honest. The sky is always different. It hasn't decided what kind of day it wants. And sometimes a new guest will stand on that same path and ask, is this really for people like me? And I'll say, especially for people like you. Then I hold the door open. Not because I owe them something, because I can. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for someone to say sorry. Others spend it trying to forget why they ever needed one. I did both for years. Then I stopped waiting, stopped needing, stopped shrinking myself to fit a version of me that made everyone else more comfortable. The truth is, revenge never interested me as much as peace did. I didn't know peace would look like this. Like women laughing over soup, muddy hands in a flower bed, and silence that doesn't sting. He's gone. The damage isn't, but so am I. I'm here, breathing, rooted. And the girl in the blue dress, the one they left behind, she's not waiting anymore. She's not broken. She's not better. She's free. If this story hit something real for you, if you've ever lived through your family drama, carried the weight of silence, or dreamed of a quiet kind of revenge, you're not alone. We tell true feeling stories like this every week. So, if you're into revenge stories, especially those that start with pain and end with power, hit subscribe for more family revenge stories that don't just shock, they resonate.